Lower your ping with What the Fast. What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Throughout the history of League of Legends, there's been loads of buffs and nerfs that have taken place across hundreds of patches. And every now and then, it's always fun to take a look back at what used to be. Let's get started. As we go through the top 5 biggest buffs in League of Legends history, keep in mind a few things. First, that we are only looking at buffs that took place from Season 1 onwards. Next, that we are measuring the buffs by how impactful the buff was to the champion, meaning that buffs that made a champion go from very unplayable to extremely strong carry much more weight than a buff on a champion that was already somewhat viable. Another thing to note is that a lot of champions were buffed due to something else that occurred in the game other than a direct change in their kits. For example, Targ received a huge indirect buff as a result of the change of support items at the beginning of Season 4, and so he didn't make the list since we'll only be looking at direct buffs to a champion. And lastly, we're only looking at buffs that took place within one specific patch only. Loads of champions were buffed slowly over the course of multiple patches, but those just aren't as exciting to look at, so we won't be using those. And let's just jump right into it. With number 5, we have a buff that occurred quite recently, and it's Maokai in patch 4.11. Before this buff, our Mother Nature friend was considered to be fairly mediocre and unplayed due to extremely high mana costs and a lackluster role in the meta. Well, Christmas came early for Maokai when not only all of his mana costs were lowered, but he received extra utility in the form of its ultimate placement, cast times, and cooldowns, as well as a fairly unneeded increase in base damage. Although he received some minuscule compensation nerfs in this patch as well, his win rate jumped by about 6%, topping out at a solid 53% after this patch. He was significantly nerfed 3 patches later, but not after completely dominating the competitive top lane meta for a solid 2 months or so. And to this day, he remains a strong top laner and is a fantastic beginner-friendly champion for anyone trying to pick up top lane. Now for number 4, we have Syndra in patch 1.0.0.148. Release Syndra resulted in what might have been the lowest win rate of all time, hovering around 30%. In this patch, she received major buffs to all of her damages, AP ratios, ranges, and mana costs, leaving us with what eventually became the go-to blind pick mid laner in competitive play. Back in the day when she was just released, she hovered around a 30% win rate or so, sometimes even dropping below that for a good solid 2 weeks. And the pros didn't really care much for her since she was released just before Worlds at the time and would not be allowed to play in the tournament, and so because of this she went completely ignored by pros until after she was buffed significantly, and we became left with a very strong mid laner. It took quite a while for her to be seen as strong, as well as for her to be nerfed due to the pros not picking her up for a solid few months after her release. But even after being nerfed a bit, she's still a strong blind pick choice as a mid laner on the competitive level, and has an extremely strong kit for competitive play, and just overall is a great champion right now. Next off, we have number 3, which was Shen in patch 1.0.0.134. In this patch, Shen had every single one of his skills buffed, leaving him with significantly higher damage, a stronger early game, an insane late game, and shaping him into the dominant tanky bruiser that left Shen to be the most dominant top laner for a long time in competitive play. Nobody was taking teleport back then, so at the time he was a monster pick and had easily over 90% pick and ban rates in Season 2 at the time, and shaped entire team comps if they could get their hands on him. He was immediately nerfed in the next patch, and the patch after that, and was still left with an insanely powerful kit. Nowadays he isn't the best champion, but this was mostly due to a bug that made him unplayable for about 10 solid patches throughout Season 3. As well as the meta shifting to every top laner taking teleport, where the split push Shen strategy isn't nearly as strong in. For number 2, we have a champion that was on the top of most players' lists when I discussed this topic with them, and it's actually Yorick in patch 1.0.0.121. This is the oldest buff that takes place on this list, and if you were around in Season 1, you'll remember that Release Yorick was pretty much as bad as it gets as far as a champion goes. He was immediately mega buffed one patch after his release, with a buff to every single ability as well as to his ghouls in general, and to his base stats. This resulted in one of the strongest, most annoying to play against champions in the entire history of the game. The top lane York at the time was pure terror, and even though he was immediately nerfed in the next patch, he remained to be one of the strongest top laners in the game for a long time, and was notoriously difficult to play against, all the way until Season 4 or so. He's not really in the meta anymore, but if you played top lane in Season 3 or earlier, this buff, back at the end of Season 1, would often be the thing that would make you want to just quit playing top lane altogether. And lastly, bringing home the gold medal for the biggest buff of all time, we have Evelynn in patch 1.0.0.143. Serves her right that the recipient of the biggest nerf of all time would also end up getting the biggest buff of all time. This rework of her kit turned one of the weakest champions the game has ever seen into one of the most overpowered mid laners ever. After defining what it meant to be a troll pick for an entire year, Evelynn's entire rework overhaul to her kit left us with an incredible mid lane assassin who dominated the metagame and left us with some amazing plays at the competitive level. It was also one of the first major reworks Riot ever did to a champion and set the stage for many other champions to be reworked in the meta. She received nerfs quickly and consistently, being nerfed in a solid 5 or 6 patches total after this rework, and remained in the meta as a mid laner and a jungler all the way from this rework to the current present time. And that just about wraps up my list. I really enjoy making these kinds of top 5 videos, so I hope you had as much fun watching this as I did making it. If you want to see more of this kind of stuff, definitely hit that like button so I can tell. My name is Jeremy, and that's for my video on the top 5 biggest buffs of all time in League of Legends history. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button so I can tell, and be sure to check me out over on all the socials of which you can see on your screen. And if you really enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe for some more awesome content in the future, or check out some of my other videos on your screen as well. And above all else, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.